Space communications. These will be among the main topics for dialogue.
Hopefully you can inspire designers and creators out there to reshift how we think about our own personal choices.
Hey Gary, great to see you.
Thanks, man. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming down. It's a pleasure. So Gary, you became an activist when you were 14-year-old.
Correct.
What inspired a 14-year-old to become an activist?
I think, growing up on this beautiful island, seeing it very pristine. When I was growing up, I was actually moved here when I was 8. So it took me, about 6 years to realize that there was a big plastic pollution problem on our beaches. And, year after year, plastics would be, the plastic problem would be even more in your face. And so at 14, I was like, what can the youth of the island do to make a change? And so called upon my brother and sister who were 16 and 12. I'm like the middle child. And we wanted to start an army of cleaners. So we went out every week to clean up a different beach around the island. And so that's sort of what inspired us, get started and hopefully try to protect our beautiful island.
And that was 10 years ago, was it?
That was, 10 years ago. We're going to celebrate our 11th year in October.
Yeah, the plastic issue, it's a big problem for sure. I mean, obviously I've been living in Bali 6 years and you can see the impact it's having. But it's not just Bali, it's global. I was just reading, weirdly enough, a few days ago, I was reading a stat and it was a stat, but it was also a visual reference to how much plastic we are consuming yearly and within our lifestyle. It was pretty horrific to see. So every year it was saying that we're eating or consuming 8.8 ounces of plastic. So I guess that's through microplastics in fish and various other things. And in our lifetime, 44 pounds, which is the equivalent of a large plastic recycling bin that you might have in front of your house. We're consuming that in our bodies within our lifetime. It's crazy. I can't even imagine what that's doing to our health. And you look at more people getting cancer. I mean, it's such a bad issue. How do you see an end to this? Like, where do we go to really combat this?
I think so that equates I think more visibly to like a plastic card that we consume annually in terms of the actual weight, not the volume. But as soon as the study started coming out about plastic and the impacts on our health, I think it completely changed the perspective that we had on plastic. Such an easy, simple material to use on an everyday basis. It transformed how we consume goods around the world, in transportation as well. But if you look at plastics and our relationship to it, we're truly addicted to it. Like, no matter how try we go plastic free or not, we'll still find aisles completely filled with single-use packaging. And more lately, maybe in the 80s when it was initially introduced in Indonesia, it is year after year consumed, all of us. And now when you go to a local pasar, it's literally everywhere you go. And every little piece of item are wrapped in single-use packaging. But one of the biggest problems of this material is that we do not know how to properly manage it, and it stays out there forever. So a single piece of plastic straw, for example, will stay, longer than our grandkids' kids, which is completely insane to think about how a little piece of straw that we use for, a couple of seconds will last way longer than we will as humans. And so with that, I think that, we need to truly realize our relationship to it and try to distance ourselves. Like if we all can make a single change, but also if we can implement broader governmental regulations to ban and better manage the material, I think we could potentially win this battle.
Mm. Yeah, it's crazy to think how long this stuff lasts. It doesn't obviously it doesn't biodegrade. Or I saw, I think it was in Eindhoven, there was like a mini exhibition, and somebody had sort of like, it was in the future, maybe like 500 years in the future, and it was talking about the plastic issue that once occurred and how it then eventually became banned globally. And then 500 years later, all of a sudden it was then seen, it was almost sort of looked upon as the same way that gold is now. It was this sort of valuable thing, almost like like a fossil that from 500 years ago that was no longer existed and became like gold, like very valuable. And it was just giving a case study on how that could potentially happen, because it will still be around in the oceans and
Right, for
not going to
sure.
go anywhere. And hopefully we do ban single-use plastic or plastic or whatever. And it was just quite interesting to see what, looking from that future perspective. If it did get banned, then people in 500 years' time, what would they do with all these little pieces of plastic that they're going to find around?
Yeah, and I mean, there's 8 million tons of plastic that enter our ocean every year. And once they're out into the ocean, a piece of plastic from Bali could very end up on a beach in LA or Sydney, and it just goes out into the open ocean. We found plastics at the deepest ocean floor, highest mountains. There's traces of this very material that we created for for our need to use, but unfortunately, it's infiltrated every little stream possible. And now I think when we realize the true impacts that it has on our brain, studies are coming out this year about endocrine disruptors and how plastic as a material is affecting us, not just eating fish or those microplastic particles that may be there, but any, like an apple, for example, wrapped with plastics around it, plastic that will offset within the apple, or even bottled water. About I think there's like 83% of bottled water that have been found to have microplastic particles inside of it. Tap water as well have been infiltrated. The rain, there's microplastics in the rain. So, just this very material that we thought was going to revolutionize the world is actually our enemy. And so that's, really the focus of all of our work, to combat this enemy that we created.
Yeah, we're really poisoning ourselves. And how does plastic get into rain? How does that work? Like,
so so once it gets super small through photosynthesis and it degrades, it gets super small, too small to see by the naked eye. We're speaking about like nanoparticles here, where you literally have to look into a microscope to see the size of it. And then, just through how rain is being created, it'll go up through the clouds and it'll rain. Whether it's sitting in our rivers or in our ocean, and then it'll just go back up into.
That's unbelievable.
Rain again.
It's funny because I assume the plastic bottles that we're consuming, the plastic that's very thin and soft, I heard that they're the ones that are particularly bad, because when they heat up, the particles sort of like dissolve into the water, the plastic particles. And I mean, I haven't had one in many years now, but the aqua glass, the little soft sort of like water bottles,
Yeah.
the ones that are just like you pop a straw in and then drink it and throw it away. They almost taste, the water tastes like plastic. I don't know if you've ever drunk one, probably not for many years, but like they literally, I don't know is it the straw or is it the actual water? Because there's a really like strong plastic taste in those aqua glasses, and it's just, I just dare to think the amount of like particles that are sitting inside that water.
I would assume the longer, water stays into that little cup, whether that little cup is out in the sun, that breaking down of those microplastic particles are going to go quicker. A plastic cup is actually made from this plastic material called PP, and it's actually considered, a harder plastic than the flexible plastics like plastic bags, sachets. Those are the super flexible ones that, you see even on the beach, for example, on a beach walk, you'll see how they can melt in the sun. Like a candy wrapper here we have in our offerings around the island of Bali. Well, sometimes you'll see like a candy wrapper that has melted within an offering, and you can just from the sun. And so I think that, we need to break free from our addiction, but we need to also think about alternative materials. And so right now, all of our focus is into trying to stop this endless flow of plastic that's coming in from our own consumption into our rivers because of this lack of waste management that we throw like in Bali, or in Indonesia overall, there just isn't proper waste management. So people typically, will end up throwing their trash in the back of their houses without thinking or without knowing the true impacts of it. But with rain, that goes into our deepest points, which is our rivers, and then internally that will go into the ocean. So we're trying to stop it before it gets into the ocean, right in our rivers. But our rivers, we felt, were like that perfect connection point to, communicate to the masses that, we can still stop it and connect land with the oceans. When plastic is out into the ocean, you hear about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is twice the size of Texas. But, that is so far-fetched. We don't even think about that. Like it's out there somewhere in the ocean, but we don't really relate back to it unless we, see that very piece of sachet that we used, the day previous, or like how. And so a lot of our work is really into how can we change that perspective from an individual point of view, but also have concrete action towards stopping this endless flow that's going to keep on going if we don't do anything about it.
Yeah, so you guys are doing a great job in terms of creating awareness. I mean, I'm seeing a ton of PR. There was a New York Times article recently, and one of the first images I saw of you was, you looked like you were wearing a spacesuit, and you were carrying a boat made out of recycled plastic bottles, and you was it River Cheetah that you and your brother went down, and is it the dirtiest river in the world, or Indonesia? What's the
Yes.
I can't remember the start on that now. And what was the story behind that? Like, how did that come about, and what impact did you see?
For sure. So my brother and I have always been super passionate about, this idea of adventures, and obviously founding Make a Change with Kelly, my sister. We were always close to the activism side. So, we're like, well, how can we combine this sense of adventure with activism and filmmaking, which we're learning about and, being very passionate about as well. Our first adventure was actually down the Mississippi River, so a much broader river. We did that with a couple friends on a boat made from 800 plastic bottles. The full-on deck was made from old recycled wood. And for 2 months, we went down the river, but didn't see the impacts of plastic pollution from our eyes. It was actually microplastics that were going down the Mississippi. We did some of the first microplastic tests in the upper Mississippi with a university in Louisiana. And we're super shocked to find out that trillions of microplastic particles were coming down the Gulf of Mexico every single day. And so trillions, you don't really think about that number. What does trillions mean? Like, I don't even know how many zeros goes into that number. But that next summer, we were like, let's bring this project home to Bali. Let's try to innovate around that. And upon Googling the most polluted river in the world, boom, it was the cheetah in Indonesia. On this very island next to Bali, where we've grown up. You see plastic pollution in Bali, and you know that it's bad. But in Java, I often say that it's a complete other world. And so the cheetah, which, runs for 300 kilometers through the city of Bandung, one of Indonesia's most populated cities. It's considered the textile hub of Southeast Asia in many ways, where you have, factories after factories of textile producers, mainly, who are working for the big brands like Gap, H&M, and they throw all their toxic chemical waste into the river. And in turn, you have, it's like a moving landfill nonstop. 27 million live on the cheetah. And so on that next summer, 2017, we're like, how can we properly create the most shocking visual out there about this problem? And so we set out on a 2-week kayaking trip, not really knowing what we were getting ourselves into. And like literally those suits that you saw were raincoats. So they were by no means the hazmat suits that you see now in the midst of COVID. We just went out and literally it completely changed the way we saw the world. It was like we stepped into this surreal, extraterrestrial world where, if you think about like how our world might end in 100 years or in 200 years, well, go to the cheetah room and you'll understand, and you'll get that visual that will stick into your mind forever.
It was crazy. It was like a river. It just looked like plastic. You couldn't see any water. It was like a wave coming down. I don't know if it was your Instagram. I saw it on somebody's Instagram, and it was really shocking, the amount of it was just like a plastic wave moving. You couldn't see any water. So
a river, when you look at the problems of a river, and some of Indonesian rivers, we have 4 of the most polluted, the 20th most polluted rivers in the world. Brantas is one, Begawan is another, the cheetah room. But when you look at why rivers are so destroyed is because of you have to go back upstream, where at the source of the river, where oftentimes all the land has been deforested, and so there's no way for water to keep in the soil, and so you have massive erosion happening. And when you have those flash floods, it's literally these piles of plastic that have been accumulated in illegal landfills that all of a sudden break down and will just become these trash tsunamis in a way, and go down the river in a crazy force. And so in river cleanup, there's this thing called the first flush, where we always get very prepared, which is like the first flush. Once it hasn't rained in a couple months, we want to be there 24/7 basically on the river to make sure that the trash barriers we're setting up are not just breaking down, but we can control the situation. And sometimes with masses of wood, you have tree logs. On top of that, you have these masses of you have couches, you have on the cheetah room, there's been dead bodies that have been found in these trash tsunamis. So very, very disturbing sights. But on the cheetah room, it was like trash burning. This is no rainfall, just trash burning every 300 meters. And you have these micro landfills being dumped on both sides of the riverbank. And so that just is beautiful Indonesian river, tropical with with coconut trees, and all of a sudden you have these big piles of plastic that just accumulates. So, but yeah, we produced a video series throughout that trip to document our efforts. And, overnight they went viral, and it was amazing to see the power of social media and the power of a crazy idea to really install change. And I think that the cheetah room expedition was a true testament that completely changed our minds. And again, the power of that expedition was really that 2 weeks after finishing it, the Ministry of the Environment announced an emergency cleanup plan of the cheetah room after watching our videos. And 4 months later, the Indonesian president announced the biggest cleanup in Indonesia, which is the Cheetah Room Harum program, where he deployed 7,000 military troops to clean up the river. And, Indonesia's head general announced war against plastic. So I think that that was a true testament that, we are in a state of crisis, putting an army to clean up a river, but more so that, we need to start working collaboratively to make sure that we start cleaning our rivers, which are the lifeline of our planet.
Yeah, amazing job on that one. So it's incredible you got the government to listen. It's quite clear that governments just aren't doing enough. Not just focusing on the Indonesian government, I think globally just governments just aren't doing enough. And do you feel that because there was so much international exposure that came from that expedition, it was sort of like something that the governments did as a bit of a PR thing or to make it look like they were doing things, or do you think they're really serious about implementing change? I saw a news section recently that said by 2025, Indonesia planned to reduce plastic ocean waste by 70%, and in the next 25 years, I think it was, become 100% plastic free. Now they're pretty, they're great, but they're very ambitious targets. Do you think we have the measures in place to achieve that, or do you feel like it's going to be 4 years, different president, things will change, or do you think we're serious, or the governments are serious about really making this impact and the serious change?
I think when you implicate an army to begin with, it's super strong-handed. No governments previously had done that, and it sort of inspired this global movement where you saw the Dominican Republic also deploy their army to clean up that plastic wave of plastic that came out that next summer, and other governments as well deploying their army. But those goals are very, very optimistic. The cheetah room even to clean up in 7 years. We're 2.5 years in the middle of this cleanup. And although we've seen amazing progress, and although there's still about 3,000 military troops cleaning up the cheetah room every day in the midst of COVID, with no hazmat suits, just doing it because they've been assigned to do it, I think that there's willingness to try to not be the second biggest polluter in the world, which is currently what we are after China, and really to progress. As I think, when you see trash lying in our streets, all of a sudden, the first thing that comes out of tourist minds is like, oh wow, this is a very developing country, and Indonesia is always trying to make the leap towards becoming a developed country. And in many ways, waste management and plastics and plastic pollution, if we're able to manage it properly, we have a much better appearance. And I think plastics is oftentimes, the visual stuff. It's like, if you see plastics on the streets, that it's dirty. You might think that, governments are not super structured. It's a disorganized country, a lot of corruption. There's, I think, some of the first reactions that tourists get when they come to Indonesia. But yeah, it's super important that we tackle this. And I think that we have some, great people in power, and hopefully, some great activists that are staying here for the long run, that are going to make sure that, this scales up massively, quite rapidly.
That's a fantastic start. I think with it almost seems to me like cleaning up the rivers, that's definitely an amazing thing to start with. But getting to the actual root or the source of the issue, I mean, could we looking at the corporations, the big companies that are really producing this plastic? Do we need to look at that a little bit more closely and implement some maybe harder restrictions on what they can produce? Like maybe in 5 years' time we say, okay, these big companies, whoever it is, Danone, Coca-Cola, Aqua, these big offenders, do we need to say to them, okay, by 2025 you guys aren't allowed to produce single-use plastic anymore? I'm sure they would probably get their skates on and come up with some innovation in order to allow their business to still move forward post 2025. I almost feel like that's the type of hard measures that we need to start applying to these companies, this type of pressure to say, okay, we're not going to accept this anymore. But I just don't know how intertwined these corporations are with the governments and the complexities that kind of goes with enforcing such a big change. But I think we do have to really do something as hard as that. Otherwise, I just don't see it ever stopping,
I think one of the biggest problems in Indonesia is that there isn't a standard in terms of packaging. And so a lot of, these big groups that are packaging are not following standard regulations. And if you do not have that, how can you even properly manage the material? Single-use multi-layered sachets is not recyclable versus, bottles or whatnot are. And yeah, I think that, we need to work with corporations in order to, to make sure that they're following these regulations, but we need to set new standards in place. So Danone Aqua, actually, their bottles are 100% recyclable from our PET. And they have collection points in place in rivers. They've sponsored Boyan Slat's Interceptor, which is this massive machine on the Ciliwung River in Jakarta. It acts as an automation robot on the Ciliwung River with this conveyor belt where basically, 24/7 collects materials. So I think that there is the willingness of Big Corp, and Coca-Cola as well are opening a huge recycling plant in Tangerang next to the airport in Jakarta to properly recycle a lot of bottles. So I think that there's the willingness from these massive corporations, but now it's more on an Indonesian national level. A lot of the businesses out here in Indonesia, have no idea and no willingness to cooperate with the activists, with government. And unless, we don't set the bar standard super straight, we'll still see all the sachets that we're seeing in pasars and in the warongs here. So I think it's all about setting that standard. But, more lately, we've also seen the ban of plastic bags, for instance, in Bali, in Jakarta, in other cities around Indonesia. But is banning, in Bali, could we do, we're still seeing a lot of plastic bags being distributed in the markets here. So I think that there's a big gap. But yeah, it's a multi-layered approach. River cleaning at the end of the day is just disaster relief effort. It needs to start way more upstream. And, with how we package, how we handle with the material, and proper governmental regulations in place to make sure that we do not, do not distribute single use on a massive scale.
And so if companies do, let's say they do set a new standard and everything has to be recycled, everything has to be made so it's recyclable, and then would there be a level of education needed, do you think, for us, the consumers, to sort of see the value in this plastic that we're purchasing? And could the companies then sort of take like the old milk bottle model where you would keep a milk bottle and get 5 pence off your next milk bottle or whatever? Is that something you feel could work, like that type of storing of the plastic and then giving it back, or maybe taking it to a recycling centre where you get sort of cash for trash or whatever? Do you think that's something that could maybe work, or has that been tried or tested anyway?
I think the perfect model to speak about that is the water gallon. And the water gallon is 90% recyclable, or even more, I think, where people, purchase the gallon, and very much like the milk jug model. But yeah, how can we install these models? How can we potentially have bulk stores, but on a local level? And I think that now more than ever, where literally these sachets, people are buying, like most of the people that work in factories along the cheetah room, are living on $1 to $2 a day, and they may not have the financial means to buy in bulk. And that was, their previous lives. You would go to the market. This is in the 80s and the 70s and the 60s. All that was available in bulk. But all of a sudden, things were wrapped in plastic and made cheaper because you could make individual quantities. And so now that we are selling individual quantities, things are as cheap as they can be. And unfortunately, for those people that are living in poverty, in extreme poverty, they do not think long term. It's very short term thinking. So I think one of the ideas that we've always brainstormed is like, could we have a bulk store made for the local market, and like a Circle K, a no plastic K, or whatever you would call it, and make prices so cheap. But then this is like, you go back into agriculture and whatnot, and trying to make sure that everything is sourced ethically. But I think if there's one thing that this COVID has taught us, is really to think about new systems and reshift, and hopefully this is gonna create some new conversations about how can we step into more of a green and sustainable world. I think that it's an entry calling for innovators and entrepreneurs and sustainability gurus to come in and try to make a real shift in our world.
No, I agree with that. I think we are definitely in a new space that we found ourselves in, where we can look at these old systems that clearly aren't working and implement some serious change. Are you seeing any new innovation coming through that could potentially replace the single-use plastic we're using? We were chatting on the show a couple of weeks ago, looking at seaweed and other types of things. Have you seen anything coming through that you feel could act as a replacement, or any innovation that's going on at the moment?
I think that there's like this entire scene of biomimicry, where you create materials from bacteria and yeast, but also on more locally note, there's seaweed as a big material that people are starting to innovate, as well as bioplastic. But the truth is that I think that there's still a lot of these startups are like in the research phase of material, and if we really want to see a material revolution, it's not going to come in the next 10-15 years. So we have 10-15 years to deal with this material that we created, that's that we need to manage better, so I think so much of the funding that's coming in right now in terms of circularity needs to go into waste management and how we deal with the material.
Yeah, because there's enough plastic, I heard this anyway, there's enough plastic already produced in the world that could just keep us going forever if we were recycling and in an orderly fashion, getting it all together and putting it back into the system. I guess that circular economy is something we need to sort of look at, which is very much the principles that nature applies to everything. But again, it's how do we get to that point where we enforce these new circular systems on big companies, and then also just in our daily lives, just people like ourselves, how do we educate from a young age in schools on like learning about these things? Because a lot of people just don't know. That's half of the issue. A lot of people don't have the awareness and the education. And I know certainly in Indonesia there's a big lack of education on the subject on a mainstream level. Are you seeing any positive work done on that side in terms of education or awareness?
I feel like the big problem, though, there's a gap as well. Like if you educate the masses or the population, but you're not providing the solutions to manage the waste, people are going to know about it, but they're not going to have the solutions in place to properly, separate their trash or whatnot. And so if you run into those problems, like I feel like that's why waste management is so important to have even before you have. You need infrastructure in order to educate. And so I think it's a hands-on approach, both together. But yeah, I think that from an educational standpoint, I'd make a change. We're always trying to come up with the craziest ideas to educate people and to change their perspective. One of the projects that we did in New York, back when I was living there, I think it was, so 4 years ago, one of my friends decided to wear every single piece of trash he created for a month. And so he designed, the special design trash suit, and every day, a little bit like Super Size Me, he'd throw in all the trash he created in a day, symbolizing the average American, which is 4.5 pounds of trash in terms of packaging a day. So, as the month went on, he become bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that visual was so powerful to completely change our perspective. At the end of the month, he was wearing 96 pounds of trash on his body. And he would walk the streets of New York. He got kicked out of Whole Foods, tried to go to the cinemas, got kicked out as well. He couldn't get through the turn swipe of the metro. And but that project really made an impact. And now I speak about it, at a couple conferences, and people automatically remember that visual because it was a powerful one. So I think that in educating, we need to come up with super strong visuals, a little bit like the turtle with its straw up its nose. Those visuals are so shocking that you can't look away from it. And, I think that there's something to say with image and videos, and that will change our minds. I think on a more Indonesian national level, we could use images way more. And we're excited to be doing a couple projects as soon as COVID slows down. So early next year, we'll be doing some projects along that line.
Amazing. I'll have to check that video out. I didn't see that one.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty interesting. But yeah, I guess you do need that image, that sort of shock factor that kind of gets people thinking, and you get that sort of emotional connection, because we all use plastic in our daily lives, and you see it, you go to the supermarket, and one supermarket, there's probably about 1 million pieces of plastic in a large supermarket, I assume. So times that by how many millions of supermarkets there are around the world, it's a big problem. But when you talk about systems, like specifically recycling systems, I grew up in England, where you think things are a lot more structured, it's a lot more developed country. And we all get the recycling bins in the front of our houses, and there's a level of separation there, which is great. But then you do that for 10 years, and then you learn that what you thought was being recycled is actually being shipped to Asia, and then it's just getting or China or wherever it was, and then it's getting landfilled illegally on the other end. So it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. And there's a real the recycling industry was a very corrupt sort of system, the way that people were getting paid for collecting and dumping and things like that. So again, it leads you, even when systems are in place, it's who's actually monitoring these systems, who's checking where the stuff's going. And governments just seem to, as long as it's kind of out of the country, they just don't seem to care about it. And Southeast Asia very much became the sort of garbage bin for the West, didn't it? But I believe now that's stopped, or at least in China, they've refused to take the plastic. Is Indonesia on that list, do you know?
Yeah, so China stopped a lot of the plastic coming into their country, but they announced in 2021 that they're going to completely stop every type of plastics out there, waste coming into the country. Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines have been some of the been some of the countries that have when China can accept its trash, it's bounced off to Indonesia. And so you're seeing villages in East Java, filled to the brink of plastics, literally filling up the entire streets. And those visuals haven't been seen enough, I think. That it's very, very scary to see, how, for example, a country like Indonesia is being used. We produce so much plastic here, fourth biggest population in the world. And on top of that, people are sending the trash over. There's been sort of a war going on with, ships being sent back to Canada, to Australia, from this plastic being sent here. And I think that we need to stand up, and we need to stand with our values, because there's a problem that we need to sort first. It's our own trash. When you look at the informal sector, the plastic mafia, there's 3.7 million scavengers or waste pickers in Indonesia. And I recently did a story about them in the midst of COVID. With big oil price dropping, this is the beginning of this economical crisis that we're experiencing. China closing its doors when COVID was at its peak. It's impacted big oil price and the cost of it. So plastic all of a sudden started to produce at a massive rate. And unfortunately, we're seeing so many more pieces of plastic being put out on market because the price of oil is dropped. And so that's having a very significant impact on the roles of waste pickers, with the prices of recyclables as well dropping. And so in Bali, for example, there's 1,300 families that live on plastic, live on trash, roaming the streets, trying to find and scavenge for the hidden treasures on the streets or on the beaches. And just by our landfill here in Bali called Suwon, I was super shocked to find out there was 300 families that just live on the back of Suwon, and they go up at night to try to see what they can find. But with big oil price dropping, their daily wage has gone from 75,000 rupiah to like 15,000 rupiah, so more than half, 70% reduction rate in their daily wage. And these are the people that you never think about. Wherever we went and did our expeditions, we always looked at these waste pickers as like the ultimate heroes, the powerful. These guys are living their, like, speaking to some of them here in Bali, they moved from Java 30 years ago for a better life, and they've been stuck in this mafia life, trying to clean the river streets, trying to get any pieces of plastics that are actually valuable, and they're the true heroes. So I think that there's some shift happening in how we can change the way and the systems in place of having a middleman to control them and these families around Indonesia and the world. And I think that's going to be very interesting to, providing them health insurances, providing them technology to be able to live an more independent life. But the truth is that these systems are so wrapped up that it's hard to penetrate inside. So a lot of these international companies that are trying to come up with solutions from incineration to plasma furnaces, to turning waste into energy or waste to fuel, we're coming to Indonesia as this place of plastic gold where we have so much and endless. Oftentimes they're not able to penetrate inside the country because of how complicated the scene is around plastics.
So when you say plastic mafia, so it's a group of people that are collecting the trash and then selling it? How is that?
So it's basically like a middleman that will have maybe 50 families working for him. And so yeah, let's say you're one of the guys in the system, and so you pick up your 20 kilos of PET, so plastic bottles, you sell it to the guy who will buy the 50 people. He'll accumulate the trash, and then once he has enough, he'll sell it to a recycler who will then break the plastic down to try to recycle it. And so within that system, it's very complicated to get out once you're in, because you have proper, you're part of the community, you're maybe given a house, you're given this daily wage. And so the waste picker community are responsible for 1 million tons of plastics in Indonesia, which is a huge number. So they're definite, a true testament to seeing that, this informal sector sometimes, they're can be quite effective.
So that's kind of the job the government should almost be doing on a large scale, and every neighborhood have that recycling facility, and then employ a team of people who can then go out and help and pick up trash and from households and that type of thing. But yeah, I wonder what sort of companies are actually using it for recycling. I mean, we're seeing a lot of on a micro level anyway. We're seeing a lot of recycled plastic trend that's going on. I mean, we've been doing quite a bit down at Potato Head for a few years, and I'm seeing more and more of these little labs or little workstations popping up that are reusing a lot of the PET plastics and then melting it down into sheets and then making those sheets into furniture or homeware and things like that. So there's that. I mean, that's kind of like a positive thing, I guess, that because it is changing the mindset of what could be done with plastic. And whenever I've actually made anything myself or I posted it on social media, we get quite a big reaction of people that see it. They're like, oh wow, you've turned 8,000 plastic bottles into a chair or a stage or at a festival or whatever. So I think people are interested in it, and I think the whole recycling thing is something which we need to really look at deeper. I mean, are you seeing much of that at the moment in terms of using design or art as a vehicle for change with waste materials such as plastic?
I think definitely. I mean, that's the we've seen this global movement called precious plastic. These machines that you can build yourself, fully open source, and anybody can build these machines with full blueprints, how-to videos, and that has really inspired me. Actually, that mechanism, that system of giving all the ideas for free in a world where we're truly experiencing environmental crisis. We've sort of applied that exact model to our rivers, and so that's what we're launching next month. Sungai Watch. Basically, we want to give all the blueprints, how-to videos to our trash barrier solutions that we've been piloting here in Bali, but also any localized models that exist out there. So in the midst of the last few weeks, I've been touring every potential river in Bali, seeing whether there's cages or, a fence or a net out there, documenting it, but also getting, a designer to actually draw up a blueprint so that we can publicly release these guys, and it can inspire very much like these machines that you turn waste into gold or waste into a chair, so that it can be the perfect collection platform. Because I think that it's so these machines work greatly in the West, in Europe, where you have segregated waste, and you can just go to a recycling center and ask for a certain type of plastic to recycle it into a chair. But in Indonesia, where we do not have enough collection points, we need to really, an area where we're really focusing, especially waste in rivers.
Awesome. So that open source model, you're kind of applying that, what you guys are coming up with in terms of capturing the plastic, the mechanisms and the tools that you're building, you're then sharing those so other people around the world can do it as well.
Exactly. And hopefully, building a big river community globally where people can learn from each other, teach each other, because a river in Bali can be very different to a river in Costa Rica, and I think we have so much to learn in this space, and doing it open source will hopefully be able to accelerate impact a lot quicker.
I think we are now in that realm of enough's enough. We need to start sharing, and kind of this whole competitiveness that we have as a not in Indonesia, but just on a global level as humans, this sort of system that we're in of getting to the top and everybody sort of looking after themselves. I think we really need to look at that. Okay, how do we move forward collectively, share the knowledge, share what we have, and really kind of come through this together, So I think there's definitely something in that open source and building a community of people that can share. And that's kind of spiderweb effect. So when are you launching that then? Is that related to the recent cleanups I've been seeing you doing in Bali? That I think it was the New York Times that wrote about it recently. So what are you doing next? I saw you've got a group of people down the river down here. Is that just a bit of a test for what's to come with the new project, or what?
Yeah, so we have a weekly cleanup series. It could be myself or a couple of guys or 60 people. We brought some CEOs from some of the corporates that you mentioned, to get them thinking differently about the waste problem. And I think that river cleanup is very different to just a normal cleanup, because you're in the water, you're getting the full sensory perspective of debris floating on a river, but also the smells, the mosquitoes, everything around it. And so on the rivers the river cleanups that we host, we typically have a trash barrier there, and that's one of ours that we've deployed. And so we have to properly maintain it. And funding has been postponed with COVID, unfortunately. So part of me, as soon as the social distancing was allowed, we launched this cleanup series to try to get people that were stuck in their houses that wanted to get outdoors. So we do it with stand-up paddles, and actually we're building our first plastic bottle kayak, which we'll be cleaning up the rivers with. So then it goes full circle with our expeditions.
Cool. And when you're in the water, then I assume looking at some of the rivers I've seen around here, it's pretty polluted. Is there any danger of getting sick from what you're doing, or do you have enough equipment that allows you not to get sick? Or have you ever fallen in, or has there been any accidents while you've been doing this, or how dangerous is it, the work you're doing?
It's obviously dengue has increased. There's a lot more cases than ever before, so that's something to consider. But then it's all the toxic chemicals that we don't even see by the naked eye. That could potentially cause something. So always trying to be as safe as possible. There's a lot of hand sanitizer and whatnot. but that shower afterwards is very much, a huge luxury to have. So I think that, so much of the Petanis here in Indonesia, the farmers, who have come up with the solutions when I'm interviewing them, and they have come up, with simple like bamboo sticks in a little subak. Subaks, are the irrigation channel for the rice fields. They're going in with their full body inside of the subak and taking it out with their. So I mean, they're maybe more immune to some of the diseases that may be floating down the rivers of Bali, but this is something that we have to scale up. We set out earlier this year at Davos, launching, protecting 100 rivers by the end of the year. The truth is that there's just no way of doing that within the next year because of what we've been faced with this COVID pandemic. But we can share our knowledge and have, communities all around the island that are passionate about cleaning up the rivers, that are passionate about cleaning up their communities. They can then be inspired to start their own movements. So hopefully, people stay safe. And if hopefully, plastics is not even in our rivers in the first place, and we don't even have to be there to clean up.
Yeah, we'll get there eventually. That's the goal. You're doing a great job so far. And so you mentioned that your budgets have been cut during the COVID thing, and you're making great change or big impact with Make a Change. How are you sort of like, are you self-funding this, or are you getting help? Is it like a charity model? How is it working at the moment?
So with Make a Change, we're like a full-time media outlet, also a full-time production company where we produce short films, but then our nonprofit, fully focused around river cleaning. So we work with sponsors to sponsor individual trash barriers, and with this platform, we have sponsors on board, but always obviously welcoming new sponsors to come in and help our work to make sure that it's financially viable. Because what we like, if you look at a river, all the plastics that we would be able to collect, there's just no way of making enough money through the resale of, once it's cleaned, pre-washed, pre-sorted. We felt that, there was a need once we collect the material of not just throwing it in the nearby landfill, but also properly managing it and seeing what was inside the rivers. Since we're going into the river, why not, going the extra way of accumulating data? So part of our cleanups includes full data analysis into what brands are actually dumping their trash, so we can visualize, so-and-so, this brand, so-and-so, that brand, but also the types of plastics out there. So we divide everything in 9 different types of plastic, from PET, which are the plastic bottles, to PP, which was, those plastic cups that you mentioned, styrofoam, single-use sachets, bags, straws, glass, metal. And then once that's done, we even go the extra way so we're starting our first pilot of Tibu Beneng in Canggu, which is right here, going to be covering 4 kilometers of stretch line, which we start on next week. And we're super excited to have at least one model of a village where we can have a full-on management system in terms of dealing with the material, sorting it, and hopefully accumulating a little bit to try to generate some funding to pay the cleaners. I brought my first batch of 105 kilos of plastic to EcoBali, our true partners on this project, and it was worth 60,000 rupiah. And 105 kilos. This was early on in the pandemic when I was by myself, cleaning up solutions every day, and I think it lasted me 3 weeks to accumulate that much. But this was when we had 2 solutions in the water. So 60,000 for 3 weeks worth of work. You're seeing that you really need sponsors to back up the efforts.
To try and work out how you can scale that up and make it more manageable.
Or you make a really cool product that you sell from the plastics.
Yeah, I think that's the key, because that shows the value in it.
Right.
Is it EcoBali that are making the Tetra Pak material, which is actually really good? We've worked with it a lot in our recent projects. And I think it's milk cartons and various other things, and I've seen they've started selling the coasters, and people kind of like that, and I think that is a really serious revenue generator if you could kind of scale that up. And so I assume that could be one good way of looking at it, and again using design as a bit of a vehicle to kind of bring awareness, but also to create a very desirable product at the end of it.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else doing that? Have you seen anyone around making good products from waste?
Well, on Bali, you collaborate. I think you guys might have worked with them.
Who, sorry?
Ecollaborate.
Oh yeah.
They're trying to doing, and then obviously a bunch of precious plastic groups on the island, and in Java and in Lombok, are trying to see what they can come up with, and then obviously other groups internationally are doing some really cool stuff. My brother just ran across the U.S. From New York to LA with shoes made from repurposed plastic bottles from Parley and Adidas. So you're seeing, how you can turn literally a plastic bottle into this ultimate shoe, and make it super desirable by partnering with a brand like Adidas. So I think that, we're at an age where people will buy gold from trash, but we need to make those products super, super, super cool, as you guys have been doing.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of disruption in the fashion world at the moment. You mentioned the textile waste is particularly bad going into rivers. I mean, I come from a fashion background myself. I had a fashion store in London and worked in fashion since I was 16. And for me, it was when I was a buyer, so I was buying lots of different brands from Paris, from Milan, from Tokyo, all around the world. And I thought I'd sort of reached my goal of like, I've got my own store and everything's, this is what I've been sort of, was my dream. And it just didn't make me happy, and I just wondered why. And then I was analysing why, what am I doing in my life that's not making me happy? And it was just that the amount of stuff that we were buying, it was like, buy a new collection, half of it hasn't sold, so it goes into sale, and then it's just like you accumulate all the stock, and then that's old now, so new stuff comes in, and you just realise the whole system is just wrong, like just this constant need for new things, and you haven't even sold the old thing yet, and then you learn about the implications, the negative implications that these products are having on the planet, and you're buying, shipping them in from all over the world, just constantly making more and more stuff. It just seems like it's a really kind of, I was just got disillusioned by it all, and I'm sort of seeing now a lot of brands who are starting to, go seasonless, and they're talking about making products rather than seasons. Have you worked much with other fashion brands, and do you think there's a lot of work that fashion brands need to do? Just looking at the waste that you've seen, I assume is it mainly textile waste, or what is the sort of main pollution that fashion industry gives off?
Yeah, so it's mainly textile waste from dyeing, and heavily toxics. In Indonesia, they just dump their the textiles inside these super, super toxic dyes, and that just gets sometimes dumped in the river without even any filters on it. So, and as we know, those dyes have shown that they can be very toxic to our own skin as well, just like the plastic that we ingest. So yeah, it's one thing of drinking a plastic bottle, but it's another to wear synthetic fibers on our skin. I mean, if we sweat, if we're doing sports with it, it gets even worse. So I think that there's so much work to be done by fashion brands still. I think that the Great Reset, this COVID-19, has really shown that production can't continue to go as it used to. So hopefully just be this new. We'll look at the world in a very new perspective and new opportunity in a way. Hopefully can inspire designers and creators out there to reshift how we think about our own personal choices. I think it's been very amazing to see the revival of vintage shopping as well in the past couple years. So hopefully that can be as well a much more developed scene.
Reusing, recycling, reusing.
And remixing as well. It's a new term in the fashion world as well that's being used to remix all clothes from, whether you have an old logo that you want to repurpose. We just did this really cool collab with Missoni for this t-shirt that they are helping us to clean rivers. And they put out, a new old 1991 logo back on this new t-shirt that they're just doing on a limited basis. I think they're just selling 40 t-shirts or something like that. But like small scale, how can you make that impactful, and how potentially can you give a percentage of the profit to a good a project?
So the Missoni product, so they were using old stock and giving it a new lease of life through kind of like whatever, deconstructing it, putting different
exactly so
artisanal approach.
Actually remixing it, which is I think a cool term to be used. And yeah, and then they're giving us part of their profit. So we just launched that last week, and so super honored to be included.
Yeah, congrats! It's awesome, man. Yeah, I like that. The Great Reset 2020. Hopefully we look back on this period as going 2020. At the time it was like, seemed like it was chaotic, but we look back and lots of new changes happened out of that, and it became a very creative period post, COVID, when new companies were changing, individuals were thinking differently. So we have hope, So I do believe that there is positives to come out of this, and there is light at the end of the tunnel for all the amazing work that you're doing and your team. So keep up the good work, man.
Thank you, man.
And on a final note, Gary, any advice for any, young change makers, anybody upcoming that really wants to kind of instigate change, just from the knowledge that you've gained and the great work you've been doing? Have you got any advice for the youth coming through today?
I think that one thing that COVID has taught me more than any other is, that like it's super important to keep focus on one thing. If we want to, have true impact as an individual, the entire climate crisis can be quite overwhelming. So really just focusing on one thing. And for me, that's really the rivers of Bali and how I can make the impact there. One big idea oftentimes is greatest on its own, and you can't really have, sometimes as creatives, you have so many different ideas. It's something that I struggle with every day. But just focusing is definitely super key, especially now, where we have this time to appreciate and staying in line with what we want to come out at the end of the tunnel to reset into, a more sustainable world after this entire situation is over with.
Yeah, great advice. Focus on one thing, make as big impact as you can in that area, and then see bigger change.
Cool, man.
Gary, thank you so much. It's an honor. Thanks for all the great work you're doing on the island and beyond. We appreciate it. Keep it up, and I'll have to come and join you down on one of your river ventures pretty soon for sure. I've got to get down there and help out. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, brother. Cheers.